On the steaming shores of the southern Gulf, where mangrove roots not like a tangle of serpents and the sea breathes its salt into the lungs of the jungle, a people rose from river fog and basalt dreams. Dawn there is a slow unfurling, gold slicks the lagoons, herons lift from the reeds like white prayers, and the mountains of the Tuxtlas smolder on the horizon, dark, volcanic, and watchful. From this humid threshold between water and earth, the tale begins. A name the future would borrow for them, Olmec, would come from others' tongues, much later. But the breath of their own beginnings is older than any borrowed word, older than the first cut of jade, older than the first song lashed to a drum. From the mists came cities. From cities, memory. From memory, monuments that do not blink. Around 1500 BCE, the rivers wrote their green script across the lowlands, the Coatzacoalcos, the Tonala, the San Juan. They flooded with the rains, retreated with the sun, and left silt so black and fat with life that maize rose in ranks as if called to war. The wet season pounded like a heart, the dry season ground its teeth. Cacao bud swelled in the shade. Manioc slept in the soil. Dogs padded behind field workers, ears flicking gnats. Children chased dragonflies while elders gazed toward the dark promontories where basalt slept in the bones of the earth. Stone was the riddle. The lowlands were a country of clay and water and long-reaching hands of swamp. Yet stone, hard, volcanic, obstinate, was wanted for altars, for thrones, for heads whose gaze could pin the future in place. So they learned to make rivers of wood and muscle. They cut rollers from trees and sleds from trunks, levering giant blocks until the earth itself seemed to bow. They shaved the jungle into trails, lashed rafts, prayed to currents. The quays along backwater creeks filled with shouts and drumbeats. Under the sun's white hammer, men and women shoved their weight against the harness ropes, the basalt groaned, the rollers creaked, and the distance between ambition and monument collapsed, fingers' width by fingers' width, league by league. Whole villages became caravans. It is said you could hear those stones coming long before you saw them, a deep, crawling thunder, like a storm made of labor. San Lorenzo rose first, the old capital of water and plateau. Imagine it circa 1400 to 1000 BCE, a ridge tamed into terraces, earthen platforms combed and planed until they followed designs traced in rulers' minds, drains of carved basalt running like tame serpents beneath courtyards to shunt away the wet season's rage. You could walk its processional ways and feel that someone had uncurled the jungle's fist and demanded order. The air smelled of copal and damp clay and the iron sweetness of crushed archiote. A ruler's court sat upon a throne whose face was a cave, mouth gaping, fangs of sky serpent curling, a doorway in stone to the place where stories are still molten. Behind the throne, attendants bore fans of feathers the green of river light. Before it, petitioners came with fish and jaguar pelts and hammered mirrors of iron or that caught the firelight and split it into shards. They carved the first colossal heads here, or so the elders of La Venta would later insist. Basalt boulders became faces as if memory had a weight and needed only to be released. Lips thick and focused. Eyes steady, lids heavy as the rain. Helmets tight to the skull, marked with signs of rank and play. Not gods, perhaps, but rulers made into mountains, not mountains, perhaps, but ancestors who would not be moved. Each head looked down the avenues with a patience that outlasted arguments. They were not loud. They were not fast. They were permanent. Some nights the city slept in a witched quiet, heavy as the saber's roots. Others, drums swung like pendulums of heat and sweat, and the ball players walked out under torches to a court calcified by ritual. Rubber shone, black moons cupped in human hands. The players' belts and yokes were carved with signs, jaguar spots, serpent coils, the step fret of mountain and cloud. The ball ascended in an arc older than human time and fell like a small eclipse against stone. The shouts rose. The game was not merely a game. It was the cosmos rehearsed, the crossing of twins in the underworld, the struggle of night against day, the long rally between mortality and the wish to outlast it. There were days when the ball struck a marker and the whole court went still, for a verdict had been rendered, not by men, but by the rules stitched into the world. But it was not only spectacle that drew the region into coherence, it was networks braided across distance. Jade arrived here from valleys where mountains combed the sky, obsidian arrived like frozen night hacked from highland volcanoes, shells brought sea answers from coasts that knew other winds. In the markets, your ears would have heard barter in many accents, river folk trading nets for beads, mountain travelers palming green stones with a reluctance that betrayed how hard they were to find, lowland farmers weighing goods and salt cakes with the concentration of priests. There was a grammar even to the quiet, the way a stranger's sandals held mud of a particular grit, the twine used to lash a bundle, the scent of pine resin, foreign in this wet country of mangrove and sabre. The world felt large but knit, like a net whose knots were altars and courts and storage mounds, whose cords were trails and creeks and allegiances. Rain made its own calendar, and so did kings. Around 1200 BCE, San Lorenzo's ceremonies climbed to a fevered complexity. Plaza alignments answered the sky. Priests tracked the sun's teeth across the horizon and raised sightlines through which equinox and zenith would walk as narrow as a blade. Fires flared on platforms in season. Blood dotted bark paper and spilled along stone, an offering to open the throat of the year. Jaguar was there, or rather the thought of jaguar, the weight of a cat's shoulder, the yellow heat of its eye, the low thunder of a growl that vibrated bone. In their hands, the animal was not only animal, it was the cipher of sovereignty, the cipher of night, the cipher of crossing. Children of noble blood sometimes wore masks whose corners curled like fangs. Stone baby faces, plump, baffled, sacred, lay in caches under floors, their mouths downturned as if a god had passed through them too quickly for comfort. At the edge of this made world, the swamps went on being swamps and reminded the people how much had to be negotiated with tide and flood. The nortes came, cold winds beating down the coast, and the fishers wrapped their shoulders and paddled into waves the color of dull knives. Crocodiles slit the water with their calm, prehistoric angles. Turtles creaked onto sandbars at night and bled the mystery of eggs into pits they forgot by morning. The Olmec were not naive about danger, they were intimate with it. If you held your breath in the dark long enough, you could hear the crunch of a jaguar's step and know that your house was only as secure as your fire and your friends. Then the rivers changed their minds. It happens in flat countries that water, bored with its own path, desires a new one. Silt climbs. Channels choke. A terrace held up by a ruler's will becomes a lake's suggestion overnight. A flood remembers where it was 30 years ago and goes there as if called. San Lorenzo learned this lesson with the bitterness of wet ashes. Around 1000 to 900 BCE, the old ridge city lost its appetite. Its waterworks silted and needed more hands than even a king's voice could summon, trade lines rerouted to a fresher mouth of river, the powers that once met under its altars began to meet elsewhere. The colossal heads remained, as hulks of memory do, but the ceremonies bled their life to another place. La Venta gathered it. On an island of firm ground among swamps and streams, safe but not aloof, near but not crowded, it began to stack earth until the horizon had a new tooth, a clay pyramid rising like a patient volcano reincarnated as geometry. If San Lorenzo had been a river city, La Venta was a model of the sky stitched into mud. From c. 900 to 400 BCE, it drew people as a half draws night talk. Its plazas inhaled pilgrims who carried offerings wrapped in cotton and woven words. Its courtyards knew the slow thunder of processions and the secret steps of midnight rites. There, the old cave-mouth thrones were renewed, the jaguar's cipher was rewritten, and green stone was taught how to be rain-caught forever. They buried mosaics of serpentine blocks, perfectly fitted masks of the earth, then covered them with soil, as if to remind themselves that beauty could exist purely for the underworld's eyes. They set colossal heads to watch, and in times of decision they arranged small jade figurines facing a single, central figure, the scene frozen as if a council inside a dream. They cached axes of polished green as if laying up lightning for a future drought. The earth itself became a codex, page upon page of deposits and layers, each with its own grammar of color and shape. If a god ever needed to read what people had wished, they could come to La Venta and dig. Rulers in La Venta walked with the force of a stamped glyph. Their dress was the rain's memory of feathers, the mountain's memory of stone. Their voices were trained to be heard through copal smoke. Some wore bands of jade that pulled the earlobes like moons caught in orbit. Some fastened mirrors across their chests so that anyone who looked at them had to see themselves and the fire behind. The court could overflow with bounty, fresh fish still glistening, baskets of maize that smelled of sweet starch, cacao ground to a brown powder that trembled in a gourd like a secret. At other times, it overflowed with fear, forests advancing where fields had been, water roads clogged with floating islands of hyacinth, rumors of enemies whose monuments were pushing up beyond the horizon like rival mountains. Yet the Olmec genius was not simply to build, it was to mean. To take the flood's tantrum and the jaguar's hush, the resin sweet, heavy smoke and the pension of stars, and combine them until a plaza could act like a sentence and a ritual like a grammar. When a ruler sat within a cave-mouth throne, it said something about beginnings, that power emerges from the places where day becomes night. When a ball player placed a rubber moon into motion, it said something about time, that our days are volleys and we are judged by how we return them. When green axes shone and then disappeared beneath the fill of a platform, it said something about value, that the earth is a vault and wealth can be charged with meaning simply by sleeping in darkness. Trade braided these meanings across distance. Through the passes to the highlands went fish and salt and river shell, back came obsidian blades like night slices, magnetite that could summon a spark when struck, and rumors of other courts where other rulers sat so still their servants seemed like weather. Along the coast, canoes cut the silt-brown water, hugging mangroves to avoid the sea's moods. Inland, porters learned to walk as if dancing, knees springing, back straight, bundle high, mind somewhere else, like a song that carries the feet for you. Stories traveled with them, stories of twin heroes and underworld bullcourts, of how the first maize was stolen from a mountain that was also a turtle that was also a god's practical joke. In markets, a child might hear these tales over a bowl of atoll and not know that one day entire civilizations would anchor their calendars to such stories. For now, it was enough that the sun rose and fell, the rains came and went, and La Venta stood like a promise. To live here was to be apprenticed to water. Even in the driest months, the ground exhaled damp. Clay clung to ankles. Houses sat on platforms like boats tied up between voyages. The people knew how to talk to the wet, how to braid reeds into baskets that ignored rain, how to burn greenwood until it confessed to fire, how to read the way a frog calls before the flood arrives. Everything had its season, and every season had its omen. A flight of scarlet macaws could undo a plan, a sudden silence among the cicadas could undo a council. This was not superstition. It was a literacy in the grammar of place. The rulers' faces, those that became basalt, those that remained flesh, were not untouchable. They presided at feasts and funerals, they bled in public to knit the social fabric with the thread of their own pain. They were expected to be both mountain and reed, to hold the line and to bend when bending kept the house from breaking. And when the world asked for spectacle, they gave it. Processions thundered through the plazas like tamed storms, shell trumpets, turtle shell drums, rattles stitched with seeds and brightened with the sheen of fish scales. Children gripped their mothers' skirts. Old men leaned on staffs carved with serpent knots. Masks drifted in the torch smoke, jaguar, eagle, caiman, faces that were more than faces, roles that were more than roles. Beyond the heartland, outposts woke, their earthworks smaller but their hearts identical, trays sapotes on the river's bend, island hamlets steadied on shells, ridge villages with a view over the green sprawl. The Olmec stamp spread not like conquest, but like a tune you can't stop humming. Potters in far towns copied the curve of an Olmec lip, masons hacked local stone into clumsy thrones that still, somehow, felt like a right idea. Jade workers in distant valleys shaped small, fierce pendants that made their wearers stand taller. The lowlands became a brand that even the hills wanted to wear. And yet, always, the jungle waited. Insects stored 1 billion needle pricks for any morning you forgot your smoke. Vines found your roof and fingered it apart. Sap bled from cuts and glued your tools together. Heat argued with breath until the afternoon went soft at the edges and the only remedy was shade and water and the thought that tomorrow would be less stubborn. The people learned to answer with patience, with engineering disguised as participation. Earthen platforms rose not against the swamp, but with it, drains carried water as if doing it a favor. Crops were coaxed from muck as if the soil were a child who didn't like to share. By 600 to 500 BCE, La Venta's shadow had reached as far as a shadow can reach in a country of clouds. Pilgrims still came. Markets still breathed. The pyramid still remembered every hand that made it slope. But the tectonics of allegiance had begun to shift. New centers flirted with their own ideas. Far traders whispered of polities in the highlands whose gods demanded different rhythms, of lords on other coasts who had learned to speak to wind in languages the lowlands did not recognize. A world so well braided began to feel the pull of its own strands. And somewhere, a boy in the heat of a courtyard, a girl under the slant of a platform roof, someone watched a ritual and realized it did not move them as it had moved their parents. The mirror on the ruler's chest reflected not a god's face but the watcher's boredom. The bull's arc felt wrote. The incense thickened the air without sweetening it. This, too, is a part of epics, the quiet fatigue that precedes a change no one has announced. But do not bury La Venta yet. Not while its courts are chalked, not while its caches hold their green lightning, not while the colossal heads blink their invisible blinks and see what we cannot. The rains will still come, and after them the maize will stand like an army of suns. The crocodiles will still trace their slow alphabets along the backwaters. The jaguar will still be more than an animal, and the child who sees it will still be older when they look away. The Olmec, for now, are a verb. They make. They mean. They move. From this fogged and shining threshold, the story walks inward, to roots and first kings, to the kill and the quarry, to the gods who learn to wear human faces and the humans who learn to borrow divine bones. The gulf exhales. The mountains hold their breath. The calendar sharpens its obsidian edge. Night in the lowlands wears a cloak of voices. Crickets count and recount the same numbers, frogs gossip in the ditches, and far off a jaguar coughs like a choked drum. Torches knit small islands of honey-colored light along the paths, and within those islands people move, bearers with woven tumplines biting into the forehead, priests whose hair is bound with cotton cords, women carrying bowls whose rims are painted with a red so deep it can pass for shadow. When the torches sway, the painted rims seem to tilt and pour, and for a heartbeat the darkness drinks. Morning repairs the world with dew. The courtyards shine. The plastered platforms wear a skin of damp, pale as a cloud. Children, bare-shouldered, are sent to fetch water with gourds that ring like hollow moons. Traders shake sleep from their sandals and check their bundles, jade beads threaded into ropes of leafy green, stingray spines wrapped in bark cloth, obsidian knives nested like stiff black leaves. A man haggles for salt cakes pressed into the shape of the sun, a woman smiles without changing her price. Nearby, potters close their kilns, the slow breathing of the clay has ended. The jars have turned from river mud brown to the brown of roasted maize. They thrum their fingertips along the rims for proof, a sound like a moth's wing, a promise of durability. The earth remembers fingers. It remembers tools. The people of San Lorenzo lay their pride in waterworks that could have been spells, drains carved from basalt. Their inner face is so smooth a drop of rain can find its way even in the dark. When the storm seasons come, when the sky looses its cords and the river tries to steepen itself into fury, those stone arteries pull the white water beneath plazas and out to safe channels. You can feel the city's confidence in the way the courtyard's refuse puddles. You can hear it in the laughter that does not stop for thunder. Within the drains, The rain has its own festival, a rattling, a hiss, a cold rush that learns to submit to slope and plan. Every monument is a rehearsal for forever. The sculptors stand barefoot at the feet of a new basalt boulder, the sun at their shoulders like a taskmaster, and they begin by listening. They run palms across the grain, gauge the boulder's old wounds, spit on their thumbs and smear circles where a nose might rise, a lip might swell, a helmet ridge might curve like a riverbank. The first chip is a sacrament, it is also a declaration of intent. Stone dust coats their forearms in pale fur. The sound is twofold, stone on stone, breath in throat. Hours pass in the hot ink of noon, days multiply, the season changes. Slowly the face walks out of the rock. It does not arrive as a surprise. It arrives the way a storm does, everybody knows it's coming, and still, when it is here, the air is different. Not far away, the bull court holds its scraped, sloped sides like a lake that has been taught manners. Boys practice with rubber that bounces with a joy all out of proportion to its size. Their elders do not smile, this is a serious lineage. The players' hips bear the memory of countless bruises, the black gold telling of impact and resilience. The court's markers, stone rings, carved steely with weathered glyphs, a low platform where offerings have been buried under layers of ash and leaf and hope, watch as the game becomes a catechism. One boy strikes the ball true, and an old man nods once, as if a prophecy has been met. Another flinches and the ball catches him in the ribs. He chokes, coughs, and laughs by command of his own pride. Someone claps a slow beat on a turtle shell. The rhythm enters the blood and refuses to leave. In another quarter, a woman burns copal. The smoke lifts and folds, milk over black water, and the smell sits sweetly in the head behind the eyes. She speaks quietly to a figure carved from jade, a small face with the mouth corners drawn down and the eyes slightly closed, the ambiguous expression of newborns and rain gods, of someone halfway between sleep and something larger. She tells the figure about the field where maize stood as high as a man, about the way the wind came from the lagoon and laid the tassels down like sleeping hair. She mentions her brother's cough and the price of fish. She asks for the favor of regular rain, not the flood hurled in anger, not the drought that eats the throat. The figure hears. Or the woman hears herself. Or the arrangement hears, the triangle of smoke and stone and a voice. Which is to say, the city hears. Which is to say, the world registers the plea. The jungle presses its palm to the city's back. Vines finger the edges of masonry with a burglar's patience. Humidity tests everything and wins, eventually, against reed, cord, wood. The answer is repetition. Sweep, patch, replaster, realign. Repaint the red with iron-rich clay, polish the white with lime until it holds the light and throws it back, lay new mat on the council floor. Time is a wheel, work is the axle. Between them, people move with an economy born of habit and an extravagance born of belief. Belief has a weight you can feel when processions pass. Shell trumpets pour a sound like an unfurling storm. Drums held at the hip pace the steps, and the steps pace the breath, and breath shapes the chant until the chant inhabits the legs themselves. The ruler goes forward with a stillness that contradicts motion. He wears a headdress whose green feathers are long as grass in a dream, whose cut is precise enough to slice a beam of sun. On his chest a mirror flashes. In its circle strangers see their own faces, smaller than they expected, rimmed in bright circles of fire and authority. Children try not to blink. An old woman counts under her breath, the count of days, the count of offerings, the count by which her grandmother kept the household in balance. Men grip the straps of the palanquin and push through fatigue into something that feels useful and nearly holy. At dusk, the river learns to be bronze. Canoes slide through hyacinth and shadow. The paddles fold and unfold the water with a confidence that comes from doing the same thing since childhood. Those who travel upriver bring gifts that whisper of distant slopes, a piece of obsidian that catches twilight like a trapped night, a handful of pumice that floats like a lie, a story about a market 2 days away where a woman baked flat cakes so thin you could see the sun through them. Those who travel downriver carry fish packed in damp leaves, salted meat wrapped in woven grasses, wood that will cure to the density of resolve. They exchange not only goods, but calendars. Our rain came late and the wind forgot us, and the frogs sang twice and then twice again are notes in a symphony of seasonal intelligence. Years step like cranes across the marsh. The middle centuries of the tale, c. 1200 to 900 BCE, settle into their stature. San Lorenzo, grown deliberate and proud, sends out emissaries to test the strength of its reflection in other people's eyes. Some return with success, a new cache of greenstone, rumors of a hill town that imitates the lowland style in clay and local rock, a young leader eager to be taught how to build a court that will instruct his gods. Others return with a more complicated cargo, reports of another center rising where the water tastes of a different mud, talks of altars set in orientations no one here has used before, the drifting feeling that a song, once the only song, now shares the air with another. When San Lorenzo begins to slacken its jaw around c. 1000 to 900 BCE, the change is not an earthquake but a long shiver, felt first in the drains. The water takes longer to leave, sediment damps the confidence of slope, then in the markets, fewer bundles, less laughter, then in the evenings, torches spaced farther apart, stories ending sooner than usual. The colossal heads do not move, it is not their task to comment. In the cool of before dawn, a priest who cannot sleep walks the processional way and listens. He would like the stones to speak. They do not. He knows that silence is an answer. He does not yet know what the question was. La Venta's answer is shape. A pyramid like a thumbprint pressed into the horizon. A plaza whose very angles suggest that if you stand in the right place on the right day, the world will show you its hinge. Offerings laid like sentences, then covered as if the best stories must be memorized and never read again. The city on its island of firm ground learns to be a magnet. It takes iron ore and polishes it into mirrors that snare fire. It takes pilgrims and polishes them into witnesses. It takes fear and polishes it into obedience. It is not cruel, not exactly. It is sure. Here the colossal heads learn new names that nobody says aloud. Here a row of small jade figurines, each so carefully carved you could count the breath lines on their tiny chests, are arranged to face a central figure. It looks like counsel. It looks like argument. It looks like a story that is waiting for its ending. The priests cover the scene with clay and walk away. The earth becomes its own archivist. Above, the plaza resumes the business of receiving feet. Around the edges, satellite places practice a kind of call and response. Tres Zapotes draws breath in the west. Little islands of settlement spark along the Tonala and San Juan like embers you can't stamp out. Not copies, no, incorporations, reinterpretations, conversations. A pot rolled from a mold bears a mouth that could have been born in La Venta, but the clay is wrong and the paint smells different, and on the underside there is a fingerprint that belongs to a woman who has never seen the pyramid. Exchange travels as design does, through desire, through imitation, through the ache of wanting to be included in something larger than just a house, a field, a bend of river. When storms come off the Gulf, the world goes grey-green as a lizard's eye. The reeds lie flat, the dogs curl in doorways, men stand with their palms on the posts of their houses and feel the wood translate the wind's sentences. Roofs lift a little and set down again, reconsidering their agreements. Afterward, the country smells rinsed. Snakes thread the puddles with small, purposeful SS. The ball court drains. The court keeper walks its length with a critical squint and finds exactly what he expects: small repairs, never ending. He grieves that nothing is permanent and rejoices for the same reason. If nothing is permanent, renewal is justified. By 700 to 600 BCE, the past has accumulated into a weight that can be used. Priests recite the sequences of previous droughts and floods as if reading craftsmen's notes in the margin of weather. Rulers bleed from the tongue and the ears on fixed days, not always from courage, sometimes from the banality of obligation. Children can mouth the shapes of the myths before they can tally maize cobs. All of this organizes the world. All of it keeps the line taut between the court and the swamp, between the pyramid and the underworld's quiet, cold bed. The line hums. Against that hum there is a counter-melody, a curiosity. A boy watches a magnetite mirror twitch a sliver of iron, so trivial a thing, a rubbed needle turning, and he sees in this not a trick but a hint that stone can be taught more than shape. A woman notes that a certain white dust mixed with water and smeared thin makes the walls reflect the moon. An old man out in the reed bed shows a child how latex drips from a cut tree, how it can be vulcanized, though he does not use that word, by heat and smoke into a ball that promises joy and bruises and ceremony all at once. The world is myth, yes. The world is also a workshop. Names travel and shed their skins as snakes do. What later ages will call Olmec is not what the people call themselves. They are of the river, of the hill, of the house that faces sunrise. They are us and others are others. They count kin, not categories. To hear them is to understand how much of the future is a convenient stitch to the past. The word does not matter. The things they do, the ways they align their spaces with sky and water, the taste for green stone that is not only beautiful but right, these propagate in the bodies of those who see and copy and improve. Some evenings, a haze as thin as onion skin wraps La Venta. The pyramid climbs into the veil, the top disappears, the base remains. People look and feel a small sweetness of fear. So the gods permit halfway, someone mutters, and stirs the stew. In that half permitting there is a lesson: reach, but expect to meet cloud. Plan, but expect the river to ask for amendments. Lay out your plazas, but save fill for repairs. Teach your children the ball game, but teach them also how to patch a roof, how to splice a rope, how to tell by the taste of the wind that the Nortes are arriving tonight. Farther down the coast, in villages that smell of fish and unvarnished wood, the Olmec stamp is less a mountain and more a sigh. A lip on a cup, the curve exact and familiar. A motif scratched by a patient hand, a jaguar's spot, an infant's crescent eye, a crossband that could be a sky serpent's belt or a net's knotted square. A woman in a hammock leans and laughs, a man picks at a reed with a knife that was born near a volcano he will never see. The great centers rarely visit in person. They do not need to. Their ways travel in clay and habit. By 500 to 450 BCE, the horizon carries more silhouettes than it used to. Other polities insert their pyramids into the sky's margin. Other courts call to other gods with sounds that are cousins to these sounds and yet are not the same. La Venta does not die so much as it exhales for a very long time. The caches remain, the masks beneath the platforms keep their appointments with the slow, careful pressure of earth, the drained stones do their patient work even when nobody names them. The colossal heads endure rain lash and the small abrasions of wind-borne grit and outlast particular kings, then whole houses, then lineages that once believed the world would end if they did. What remains, even in the drift toward the late centuries of the span, is the sense that meaning has been muscular here. That the mists and the mangroves and the basalt flows were not just background, but partners. That power was staged insistently at the place where underworld meets breath, where water agrees to take a shape, where time finds itself represented in the bounce of a rubber ball. That if a stranger came into the plaza and stood very still and simply breathed, they would leave with a new way to feel the weight of their own days. The frame holds. The camera does not yet dive beneath the surface, but it lingers over the threshold, cave-mouth thrones waiting for occupants, jade packets wrapped and ready to be carried into darkness, a ball set on a bench like a captured piece of night. On the horizon, the Tuxtlas sit like sleeping gods, green-black and deep, the quarries inside them as quiet as hearts between beats. A heron lifts, shakes water from its legs, and writes a white stroke across the air. Somewhere, drums begin, not for spectacle, not yet, but for practice. A boy beats a rhythm and does not know he is memorizing a calendar. A girl counts the steps between two markers and does not know she is learning a map. Everything has been shown, but nothing has yet been explained. The faces in stone look past us as if we are late, as if an older appointment is being kept. To walk further in, we will have to learn the first gestures. We will have to meet the first fires and the oldest rains. We will have to feel clay with a beginner's hand and quarry with a beginner's doubt. We will have to step into the damp and ask where the first threshold was cut. The river takes a long breath. The drums answer once, twice, the agreed signal. The camera tilts, descends, and the mist parts to reveal not just a city but a beginning written in mud and seed and myth, the soils, the first faces, the first altars set against the ache of weather. Before the plazas learned the weight of ceremony, before the ball struck stone and made law, the land itself taught the first lessons. Around 1500 BCE, the lowlands were a school of mud and light, river water steeped black with leaf melt, air thick with the sugar of fermenting fruit, clouds gathering in towers like freshly raised pyramids. People settled along the levees and natural rises where the ground remembered to be firm, building houses on packed earthen pads so that each doorway sat a palm's breadth higher than the flood's reach. The nortes, those cold winds shouldered down the gulf in the cool months, pinched the mornings thin and clear. By midday the humidity returned like a forgiving god. The first fires burned under comales where flat cakes of ground maize hissed and bubbled. Maize was not alone. Manioc slept in its earthy beds, squash sprawled, beans made ladders of stems, cacao cupped shade in its glossy leaves. Fishers learned the river's sentences, when the Coatzacoalcos would fatten with silt and catfish, when the San Juan would pull brackish breath into its lungs, when a sandbar's subtle shift could turn a good landing into a wet argument. Dogs nosed the edges of baskets. Children fetched water with gourds shaped by 1,000 identical gestures. A settlement was as much habit as architecture. They cleared plots with fire and patience, ring-barking trees, letting light pour down like a new river. In the wet months, the rains crushed roofs with the weight of beads. In the dry, ash lifted from paths in small ghosts with each step. Clay answered both seasons, doors sealed with it, floors polished with it, pots fired until they rang when tapped, the note a potter's proof of worth. The earliest mounds were not yet monuments, only careful uplifts, a place to stand where the water could not argue you back down. Stone, hard, map-making stone, was rare here, but not absent. The people learned the long logistics of desire. From the Sierra de los Tuxtlas, basalt rolled and floated and stuttered across the lowlands, its first destination simple, grinding stones, pillars, low platform facings. From highland passes came a darkness that flashed, obsidian, cooled night shaped into blades. And from farther still, the green that would become a private weather in their hearts, jade, river-borne from mountains to the south and east, dragged through trade like a secret the landscape could not keep. When a woman tied a small jade bead at her throat, the swamp admitted a mountain into its household. The stories that explained all this moved with equal patience. Here, the underworld was not a faraway cave mouth, it was the wet beneath your feet, the black glossary under the platform where crabs wrote in their little sidewise scripts. The earth monster showed itself as a crocodilian jaw whose back was fields and whose breath was mist. The sky serpent coiled long as a dry season horizon, lightening its tongue, cloud its muscle. Jaguar padded between worlds, both animal and office, night's engineer, sovereignty's emblem, the hush in the heart before a decision. And maize, well, maize had a face. It wore the infant's downturned mouth, the heavy-lidded calm of rain dreams, the headband cut with the glyph of sprout and sun. A child could cup a clay figurine in both hands and understand, we grow because something agreed to be cut. By 1450 to 1400 BCE, villages stitched themselves into a loose fabric. Paths wore themselves into existence by repetition. Canoes slotted through channels so often that herons learned the timetables. A man returning from the hills would empty his pack, obsidian flakes the size of fingernails, a round mirror of magnetite that could catch firelight and lift it onto a wall, a handful of hematite dust to smear into red on a forearm when a promise needed sealing. Others came up from the coast with conch shells still singing quietly, stingray spines wrapped in bark cloth like dangerous punctuation, and salt in cakes, small suns to be traded for goods, for fish, for favor. There is a moment every craft knows when it stops being merely useful and begins to be style. Around 1400 to 1300 BCE, clay mouths learned to curve in a way that would be recognized even far away, the pulled-down lip, the infant jaguar compromise, a human face with a rumor of fangs. Pot walls thin to a confidence that snapped if mishandled, slips went on rich as river silt, the first planned iconography folded into the surfaces like a second skin. Stoneworkers, discovering what basalt would grudgingly allow, began to slice cave mouths into throne fronts, to shape cascabel-like nodules into altar faces, to groom drains until the inside of a pipe was a black mirror. The early San Lorenzo ridge felt the tremor of purpose. Nothing like later grandeur yet, just terraces that kept their shape through storms, drainage that learned slope like a prayer, open spaces that seemed to ask for processions even before processions knew themselves. It was a grammar of place emergent from repetition: platform, court, path, house, storage pit, hearth. People learned where to stand to see the sun rise between two particular trees on the same day each year. They noticed that on a certain morning a shadow edged along a wall in a way that made the spine behave. They scratched marks, knots of crossbands, step frets, jaguar spots, not as writing, not yet, but as the gestures of a hand that wanted to remember. Religion was practiced before it was theatre. A woman pricked her ear with a bone thorn, touched the blood to a folded strip of bark, set it above a little flame so that smoke could carry the message where feet could not go. A man set a greenstone axe in a small pit, placed a shell above it, a shard of obsidian beside it, and pressed earth back over, a sentence addressed to the underworld, to be read by water and root. Priests were not yet crowned by pyramids but recognized by their calm, by the way their voices made the air behave, by the way the dogs ceased fidgeting when they raised a hand. Climate enforced humility. There were years when the rains came like an apology and left quickly, the maize cob stayed thin, the river snored low, turtles dug their nests closer to distant thunder than to shore. There were years when the sky misplaced its restraint and the flood lapped the platform edges with a lazy intent, as if auditioning for a future it fully intended to win. In those seasons, the first engineering mindsets hardened, more fill under the house floor, a new ditch coaxed toward a backwater, a drain lifted a finger's breadth so that it would cough water sooner. Each solution was a story rewritten in earth. By 1300 to 1250 BCE, networks had matured into routes. You could travel from a lowland village to a highland pass without once admitting you were alone. Each night brought a hearth, a shared pot, a story you had heard before told with a different salt. To the west, a ridge town boasted a little court, its slopes too shallow, its markers too low, but it held desire like a wool holds burrs. To the east, on an island of stability in a handsome swamp, a settlement began to dream in lines, a long plaza imagined, an axis rehearsed. Someone there stacked clay and found that slope could be loyal. The plan waited like a seed. Tools changed how bodies moved. The shoulder yoke and forehead tumpline taught balance and endurance. Men and women learned to walk the way water walks, yielding, persistent, certain of destination without crowing about it. Canoes deepened their sides to carry more than fish. Rafts widened. The round logs beneath a dragging stone became rollers, and rollers taught the palms to accept blisters as badges. When a boy ran his hands along the old scars on his father's shoulders, he learned a history more precise than any calendar, the distances between quarry and court, the weights that had asked to be moved, the stubbornness that had moved them. The first modest colossi were not yet the famous heads, more like protothrones, cave-mouth seats with tongues of stone curling out, more like the idea of seat promoted to the threshold of altar. A ruler would sit and vanish waist down into a mouth, a deliberate metaphor everyone understood, a person stepping into origin, wearing beginnings like regalia. The people did not need a sermon to parse it. The court was a grammar, the body was a pronoun, the throne, a verb that turned power into ingressive form, to enter, to become, to be claimed by. Jade apprenticed fingers to patience. A single bead's polish was a school, a mirror in a square of green was a thesis. The mines were far, every piece was an argued arrival. A craftsman spent days coaxing a line through the stone, spent hours teaching water and powdered grit to bite, spent quiet, disciplined mornings holding a shape up to the light and refusing what was good in pursuit of what was right. When a small musket finally breathed under the hand, eyes heavy, mouth turned, infant and jaguar at once, the workshop exhaled as one. The bull game already owned its paradoxes, pastime and cosmology, bruise and blessing. Early courts were stubbier, scuffed with repairs, their lines chalked with shells ground to thin dust. The rubber, latex cured over smoke into moonballs, carried in its bounce an argument the people replayed whenever decisions knotted, let the bull speak. Put a question to motion and hear the gods in the rhythm of return. Not every verdict satisfied, but every verdict informed. Even disappointment disciplined the village into carrying on. At last, somewhere between 1250 and 1200 BCE, intention ripened into plan. The ridge at San Lorenzo was no longer content to be merely expedient, it would be diagram. The island among the swamps that would become La Venta learned its angles and tolerances. A priest traced sight lines with a cord, a surveyor, though they would not use that word, sighted sunrise through forked sticks. The community measured with bodies, so many paces, so many hands, so many breaths held between drumbeats. Each act drafted the future. Each mound placed was a promise to keep placing. Each drain sunk was a pledge that flow could be persuaded. The myths kept up, never far, never fully ahead. Children heard of twins who played ball in a place without sky and won their way back to daylight, of a mountain that hoarded maize until a god cracked it with lightning, of a river that fell in love with a woman and followed her from house to house until her husband taught it the meaning of boundary. The stories did what stories do, they turned weather into ethics, hunger into ritual, fear into fable, and then fed those back to the fields in the form of steadiness. At the hinge of 1200 BCE, the curtain of mist thinned over projects that would define the centuries, terraces carved to receive the weight of courts, basalt drains inlaid like domesticated serpents, plazas groomed to slope so slightly that only a finger dipped in the puddle at the edge could tell water where to go. Clay rose into mounds, first hesitant, then sure, and the geometry of desire appeared in the grass like a ghost that had decided to stop pretending. A village that had been mostly households became a center that had been mostly good ideas became a capital of meaning. If you stood on the new platform at dawn, feet dusted with lime, sweat cooling where your shirt stuck to your back, you could look out over the lowland seas of green and feel it, a rumor climbing into fact. The Tuxtlas smoked like teachers grading papers. In the shallow waters, a crocodile pushed a furrow that pretended to be a harmless current. Somewhere behind you, a mason knocked a wedge into a block and the blow sounded like a door trying a latch. Somewhere ahead of you, a child struck a rubber ball and it leapt as if thrilled by its own existence. Between those two sounds, stone persuaded, rubber delighted, the people of the lowland stepped from beginning into becoming. The roots are set. The grammar of place is legible. The gods have acquired faces, and the faces have acquired addresses. From here the story swells, craft into mastery, barter into networks, ceremony into state. The camera that has lingered on sap and clay will pull back to taking courts and altars, caravans and caches, the long arteries of trade and the green lightning buried for the underworld's eyes. A day's walk from the ridge, the reed beds teach the first arithmetic, count the stems a bundle high, count the steps to firm ground, count the breaths from lightning to thunder. Counting slips into calendrics before anyone names it. A woman hanging wet fish under a palm frond eve knows that the sun stands overhead on two particular days. She can feel it in the way her shadow folds under her feet like a mat. A man with a forked stick sights sunrise at solstice, marks the line with pebbles, and returns each year to see if the sky still honors the bargain. The zenith passages make children dizzy, no shadow at noon, the world briefly unhooked, and someone ties a cord between two stakes, plucks it like a string, and says, "Hear how the days are tuned." Their houses are reed and wood frameworks pitched on hard-packed platforms. The walls breathe, the roofs listen. On the earthen floors, chalky with lime when there is lime to spare, the comales simmer and the metets hum under maize. The sound of grinding, rock on rock, grain surrendering to paste, is a lullaby and a drumbeat, the background of a civilization rehearsing itself. Chili wakes the sauces, vanilla whispers in the goods on lucky days, archiote stains everything it loves. Smoke is both nuisance and sacrament, it blackens rafters and carries copal prayers into the rafters' dark geometry. Children learn tools by imitation, the adze that chews wood along the grain, the digging stick that persuades earth to open gently, the fish we're stitched from poles and patience to trap a tide's habit. A boy rubs the belly of a canoe with river sand until the wood is a skin that remembers fingerprints. A girl tests the edge of a greenstone celt against a strip of bark, not to cut but to feel the promise of cutting. Their instructors are parents, cousins, the neighbor who remembers where the trail floods in odd years, the elder whose hand knows when a pot has crossed from wet to leather hard, with the knowledge that will later harden into guilds and workshops still moving from body to body like warm water. The first leaders do not arrive with crowns. They arrive with solutions. Someone sees that a rising flood can be invited along a ditch dug just so, that a low place can be bribed with fill to behave like high ground. Another sees that a quarry expedition can be paced by the moon's fatness, that men and women can share the load if the load is taught to love the roller and the raft. Authority is not shouted, it accrues in nods, in the way a crowd unconsciously leaves a path for the person whose plans tend to work. Listen to a quarry run to the Tuxtlas at the very end of this era. They start before dawn, bodies salted with sleep, tumplines ready. The forest's understory accepts them with spiderwebs and the wet slap of leaves. They move through a green-chambered world, the light always arriving second-hand, the ground disclosing roots as traps and then forgiving them. At the first stream, they split gourds, drink the cool that tastes vaguely of stone, and smear their shoulders with the fat of seed so the cords will bite less. They pass a place where obsidian once cut a traveler. There is a story for that, and a charm, and a laugh that hides respect. By afternoon they round the shoulder of a hill and the basalt waits, blocky flows, faces pocked and hardened, the sleeping spines of ancient fire. They touch the stone and greet it as a future they have decided to remember. On the return, the hill's gravity becomes the lowland's argument. One misstep throws a sled sideways and the forest gasps, then settles when the rollers grip again. At a creek, they bind the stone to a raft, coax it onto the water, and suddenly the world helps, the current carries, the poles answer, the men laugh too loudly because laughter is the difference between mastery and fear. When they land at dusk near the levee where the houses glow, children come running not for the stone but for the story. "How heavy?" they ask. A porter shrugs. "As heavy as a promise," he says, and everyone grins because they all know how heavy that is. If stone is the apprenticeship of hands, clay is the conservatory. The potter's yard smell of ash and wet earth. Coils rise, fingers smooth the spirals into continuous walls, slips bloom like river water evaporating into color. A woman scratches a crossband motif along a rim with a thorn. She is not writing, not yet, but she is also not writing. She beats a paddle against a vessel lined with a stone anvil, and the belly of the pot rounds out like a full moon. When the kill is bricked and the mouths of the fire are fed, the smoke first complains, then agrees. An hour later, when the pots are still too hot to touch, she taps them with a fingernail and listens. A ring means joy, a thud means learning. Iron ores flirt with the idea of mirrors. Magnetite is ground and polished on wet leather until a square of night learns to carry faces. In the dim of a house shrine, someone tilts such a mirror and sees the fire doubled, a little sun inside a little darkness. The hematite goes to dust, to paint the skin when vows require a witness that cannot forget. The limonite smears onto a wall, an undercoat that brightens a later whitewash. An old man holds a magnetized shard and watches it turn the same way again and again, north as a habit before north is named. He thinks it is a small god with only one idea. He is not wrong. The myths do not sit still, they do what rivers do, split, braid, carry, swallow. A storyteller by the cook fire tells how the earth Kaiman once forgot to keep still and the land rolled like a fish. Another tells how twins in the place below learned the ball game from the lords of the underworld and returned with the calendar tucked in their belts, disguised as a tune. A third sings how Maze was jealous and hid in a mountain until a lightning-tongued serpent licked the door open. Every version contradicts another sweetly, and nobody minds. Truth here is not a line, it is a net. Not everything is omen and opera. Marriage is bread and salt practicality, funerals are labor and weather as much as ache. They bury their dead shallow enough that roots can find them, deep enough that floods will hesitate, sometimes with beads, sometimes with a celadon celt, sometimes with nothing but the certain knowledge that the platform will keep the house from floating away and the memory from washing thin. The ancestors are not gone. They are part of the platform fill now, part of the reason the house holds, part of the reason a child sleeps without fear when the Norte scrape the eaves. From the highlands, the obsidian arrives in clever shapes, prismatic blades that split with a nudge, edges cruel as honesty. A healer nicks a stingray spine to draw bad blood, a hunter fits obsidian to a dart that flies as if the arm continues farther than the eye can see. Across the gulf, a canoe noses into a lagoon with shell trumpets and a basket of spondylus that burns the eye with orange. A trader lays a jade bead next to a pile of salt cakes, and all at once the air in the market thickens slightly. The bead is too much, the salt is too necessary. Bargaining becomes an art that insults nobody while honoring the true order of desire. By 1350 BCE, San Lorenzo's ridge learns how to hold water like a gentle thought. Basalt drains slope in secret, sluices mouth the flood and guide it under plazas where bare feet do not splash even when the sky throws tantrums. At the platform edges, clay lips turn downward to pour rain where it can be tamed. At the corners, sumps wait to swallow and remember. Architecture becomes hydrology, hydrology becomes confidence. You can hear that confidence in laughter that survives thunder. The bull game, still rough, acquires etiquette. There is the matter of attire, belts packed with wadded bark to soften impacts, protectors carved from wood or pressed from thick cloth, headdresses for ceremony that are doffed for play. A referee beat on a turtle carapace declares points, fouls, and the restart. A certain strike, hip to marker, clean, in the view of the ancestors, is a verdict, and when it happens an entire week's argument in the council dissolves like salt in broth. The game is fun because life is heavy, it is law because joy needs boundaries to enjoy itself fully. Meanwhile, on the island of firm ground that will be La Venta, a small plaza is swept each morning with palm brooms. Children drag sticks in the dust and outline pyramids without knowing the word. A woman who has never seen a mountain dreams of one made from clay and will, a thing that will teach the horizon manners. A man lines up a row of pebbles with sunrise and accidentally invents an axis. A cache is dug in the night, a green axe, a shell, a pinch of red dust, the hole is closed and a whispered promise is pressed into the ground for safekeeping. Disease lives here too, but the marsh is not only hazard, it is pharmacy. Leaves that tame fever, barks that numb, resins that seal a wound and keep the flies honest, someone knows them all and will not teach carelessly. In a corner house, a midwife hangs a cord from the rafters for a woman to pull during birth. She blows copal smoke across the water bowl that waits to receive the first cry's reflection. When a baby arrives languid, she rubs a finger of cacao on the gums, bitter awakening, and the lungs remember their purpose. Symbols creep closer to script. On a smoothed stone, under a roof edge during the dry season, someone arranges a sequence, a sprout, a crossband, a jaw, left to right, or top to bottom, debating by hand which way meaning should run. The stone is set aside under a bench and forgotten, or not, placed instead in a wall's heart where a future mason will find it and hesitate, is this rebuilding or reading? The iconography tightens, infant jaguar mouths, flame eyebrows, sprout glyphs, sky ribbon bands. Priests practice repetition until repetition becomes doctrine. In the last decades before 1200 BCE, weather rehearses calamity and society rehearses how to survive it. A dry year forces fish traps deeper into creeks and cisterns into the corners of platforms. A wet year teaches boats to be bridges and bridges to be boats. Fields migrate a little each season, following soil that remembers how to be fertile. The solution is never to fight the swamp, the solution is to court it, to promise it respect, to manage it like a powerful in-law whose favor makes harvests straightforward and whose anger makes memory very long. At night, with the smell of damp ash and hot water, a council gathers in a longhouse lit by coals. No one king yet, not in the sense that later centuries will insist, rather, first among competent, first among those who can wring order from mud. They speak of paths that need smoothing, of a drain that silted 2 storms ago and has been lazily waiting for hands, of a rumor that Highlanders have a new source of greenstone and are making promises to people who should be promising to us. An elder reaches for a mirror, catches the firelight, tilts it so the circle of brilliance walks across each speaker's face in turn. When it shines on your brow, you have the floor. When it moves on, you swallow the rest of your opinion and let it sweeten or sour in private. In such rooms the idea of ruler gathers bones. Not tyrant, not yet, pivot is the better word, a person around whom labor and belief can be aligned without wasting motion. There will come a day, beyond this section, but already visible, when stone faces will commemorate such pivots, when helmets and glyph bands will announce them to distances that cannot hear their voices. For now, the protothrone is enough, the cave-mouth seat that swallows the lower body and returns the upper half to the world remade. For now, a mask drawn tight to a face and an offering placed right of center is enough to make the night behave as if watching. Somewhere, 1190 or 1180 BCE, a carver kneels beside a piece of basalt whose bulk winks at future colossi. He draws a lip with charcoal, a nose with a cut, and spends an hour on the crease that gives a mouth its resolve. He is not yet carving a head the size of a house, he is learning what weight does to expression, how a quarter finger more at the corner of the mouth can turn mercy into command. When he wipes sweat with a gritty forearm and leaves a dark smear across the stone, he laughs, his first signature. By the margin of 1200 BCE, all the ingredients sit within reach, fields that know their seasons, drains that know their slope, paths that know their destinations, shrines that know their smoke, workshops that know their standards, courts that know their rules, families that know their dead, markets that know the price of things and the worth beyond price. The green has moved from a rumor to a currency, the black glass from a hazard to a tool, the mirror from delight to method. Even the mist now seems to have a direction, as if the swamp had decided it wishes to be stage and will no longer pretend to be only backdrop. Stand again at dawn on the ridge. Breath feathers in the cool, the first heron cuts the air like a silver knife, a drum somewhere counts to 4 and stops, as if shy. Down below, a drain takes its first trickle and smiles invisibly. Up above, a line of pebbles meets the sun's edge cleanly and a boy who aligned them the night before cannot suppress a shout. The market stirs. The paddles lift and fall in a lagoon that smells of salt and green. On a platform, a masket waits in a bundle to be buried where feet will pass over it for 100 harvests. All of this is origin, not a prologue to greatness, but greatness learning to pronounce itself. The words are in the mouth: stone, clay, water, seed, smoke, game, mirror. The sentence waits. In the last nights before the 12th century BCE arrives, the air itself seems to lean forward and listen. Even the frogs shorten their gossip. On the ridge, men lay the final courses of a terrace by firelight, tamping clay with stones wrapped in bark so the surface holds a heel print like a blessing. In a yard below, a woman folds a tiny green axe in cotton, knots the bundle, and places it beside the house post where children will step over it for years without knowing they are walking over a promise. A boy sets pebbles into a thin line and, by luck or instinct, points them at where the sun will lift its face on the solstice. None of this is spectacle. All of it is foundation. The elders watch for omens and also for leaks. They know exactly how much rain a roof can take, exactly how deep a ditch must be to persuade a flood to reconsider its enthusiasm. They have learned, by humiliation and repair, that the swamp is not the enemy, it is the vast, patient relative whose favor must be courted with drains and platforms and respect. They have learned that clay is not merely earth, it is memory when fired. That stone is not merely weight, it is argument when shaped. That smoke is not merely inconvenience, it is a courier trustworthy enough to carry grief and gratitude where feet cannot go. And they have learned to count. Not with glyphs yet, those will sharpen later, but with shadows and drums and repetitions, so many steps between posts, so many breaths between thunder and rain, so many days between the first cicada and the first basket of ripe cacao. The counting turns into mapping, the mapping turns into building, building becomes habit, habit, culture. The ridge hardens into San Lorenzo's early backbone. The island among the swamps rehearses La Venta under its breath. Far neighbors try on the lowland style like a new rhythm and find it fits. By 1200 BCE, the toolkits are confident, the supply lines practiced, the myths perfectly contradictory in all the right places. The community, still households and hamlets in the eyes of a god, but already a center in the eyes of men, knows what to do when it wakes. Grind, fire, carry, carve. Bleed, bury, bargain, build. The earth remembers every step and grows easy beneath familiar feet. A dawn comes clear and oddly cool. The Nortes have taken the edge off the air, breath hangs briefly like pale thread. On the ridge, the drained stones shine with a faint varnish of dew, and a line of workers moves like a single, many-jointed creature, ferrying baskets of fill to where a plaza needs its last palm's breadth of height. In the lagoon, paddles lift and fall, a canoe's wake writes a momentary script that the water forgets in 10 heartbeats. Children chase a rubber ball that smells of smoke and tree sap and the hands that shaped it. In a doorway, a small mirror catches the sun and throws a coin of brilliance against a post where a knotted cord marks the height of last year's flood. The beginnings have gathered their mass. What comes next is not an accident or a meteor, it is the outcome of 10,000 small, disciplined decisions. The ridge will declare itself. The island will insist. The green stone will travel as if pulled, the black glass will chip into edges fine as intentions, the drains will make thunder seem like a manageable joke. The first colossal faces will step out of cooled lava and teach the horizon where to look. The roots hold. The sentence can finally be spoken. The century turns and the lowlands answer with architecture. San Lorenzo, old ridge of habits, becomes a diagram of power. Earthen platforms are planed until they keep the sky's reflection as smooth as a held breath. Basalt drains, laid with a mason's stubborn love of slope, snake under courts and plazas like tamed serpents, carrying rain away with the discretion of servants who never need to be thanked. From the approach trails the city looks elevated not because the land is high, but because human intention has learned how to stand. Material culture ripens into style and then into signature. Potters thin their walls to a daring that used to crack, and now doesn't. The slips deepen, iron reds, ash whites, river browns, each one a weather you can drink with the eye. Rims learn a curve that tells on its maker the way handwriting does. On a good morning, a workshop hums like a hive, paddling and anviling drum a soft tattoo, burnishers whisper, kiln mouths breathe and flare. When the pots emerge, the master runs a thumbnail along a rim. The ring is proof. The ring is law. Stonework becomes argument perfected. In the Tuxtlas, teens prize basalt colossi from ancient flows and persuade them along rollers and rafts until the ridge receives them like prodigal thunderheads. At San Lorenzo, blocks become altars and thrones whose fronts open as cave mouths, portals with fangs and volutes, mouths that swallow a ruler's lower body and return the upper half to the world transfigured. Within those mouths, figures sit or emerge, lords, ancestors, perhaps gods, hands gripping scepters shaped like Celts, faces composed, helmets tight, the architecture of authority cut into their gear as crossbands and step frets and the long sky ribbon that coils like weather obeying a ruler's calm. Then there are the heads. At first sight they look like mountains with opinions. Step closer and time slows. Heavy-lidded eyes that have seen entire rain cycles and refuse to blink. Lips thick, pressed, command without cruelty. Helmet strapped firm, cheek guards suggested with a chisel's whisper, emblems raised like low thunder over the brow. They are not gods, or not only, they are persons magnified, memory in stone. Children pass and lower their voices without being told. Dogs hesitate, caught between bark and wine. Rulers hold court within sightlines the heads can see, as if legitimacy were something that flows along gaze. Clothing follows climate, but rises to ceremony when asked. Day to day, cotton wear available, bark cloth wear not, waist wraps tight, shoulders bare to the wet heat, hair bound with woven bands, feet ready for mud. On festival days, the plaza becomes a moving garden, capes edged with shell and feather, belts thick with stuffed bark to blunt the violence of the ballgame, ears pools of jade that tug the lobes into small crescents of status, labrets glinting at the lower lip like the punctuation mark of a dangerous sentence. Paint runs like intent, hematite reds for vows, kaolin whites for purity, char blacks for night business. The ballgame matures into a theater where cosmos and community reconcile their differences. Courts lengthen and steepen, markers align with a confidence that comes from many seasons of argument settled by bounds. The rubber itself grows more obedient under the hand, latex cooked over smoke and ash, worked until it remembers the maker and rewards him with the exact rebound his hips can answer. A match begins with ceremony, shell trumpets braying storm, turtle shell drums counting the world into order, then swerves into law, serve, return, trajectory judged against markers that are mouths of gods. A clean strike at a critical moment does what 100 speeches could not. Decisions end. Feasts begin. Trade tenses and then sings. The lowlands send fish, salt, smoked meats, chocolate nibs, and polished celts across a web of rivers and trails. In return come obsidian from volcanoes that sound knives in their sleep, jade from mountains that guard green with a jealous intelligence, pyrite and magnetite for mirrors that teach fire to split and dance, shells from coasts that know other tides, and rumors, always rumors, of far courts where other lords sit in other cave mouths and insist the horizon should attend. Markets are polyglot operas performed with gourds and grins, bundles unwrapped to reveal a color nobody has seen, weights judged by palm and eye, prices reached without rancour because the net is more important than any one knot. Behind the sparkle, a logistical machine hums. Porters learn to walk with tumplines that tune shoulders and lower backs into instruments. Canoemen read color in water as language, the silt brown that hides a root, the green that means depth, the milkiness that means the river forgot itself upstream. Way stations along trails rehearse the same recipes and the same stories so that a traveler can step from household to household and feel continuity. Storms still slap everything out of rhythm, but after the slap, repairs. Always repairs. The lowlands' genius is not invincibility, it is reliability. Craft dives into technique and returns with precision. Jade and other greenstones are drilled with cords and grit, holes emerge slow as dawn. Edges are ground on sandstone until they police light. Basalt yields to pecking and abrasion, a sculptor counts blows in the thousands, the way a priest counts days. Magnetite mirrors are polished on slick wet leather until a square of night can carry the face of a ruler and the glare of a flame at the same time. Shell is carved thin as a lion hung where wind can prove it truth by rattling. Agriculture expands with systems thinking. Fields rotate not by decree but by a village's collective memory of soil moods. Household gardens outrun hunger with chili, squash, beans. River levees carry maize that stands shoulder high by late summer when the frogs sing like broken flutes at dusk. Raised beds and canals borrow a page from the swamp's own book. If you cannot escape water, insist on its cooperation. The net result is surplus enough to fund festivals, expeditions, and the long attention spans that art demands. San Lorenzo's urbanism grows articulate. Processional ways subtly slope, the eye is led, the foot is guided, the body persuaded to behave as the city intends. Courtyards carry drain mouths disguised as ornaments. Platforms step like stanzas, each one composed to receive a performance, judicial, ritual, commercial. A visitor can find the market by the smell of roasting, the court by the smell of sweat and rubber, the shrine by the smell of copal and the hush that surrounds serious requests. And the iconography tightens into a portable theology. The word jaguar, baby mouth downturned, cleft head, eyes half closed as if listening to rain inside stone, walks from altars to figurines to pendants and back again. Sky serpents coil into bands that become borders that become laws. Maize sprouts crown rulers because the people understand exactly where power should pretend to come from. On good days, an entire plaza reads like a page of mass mosaics buried and then hidden again so the underworld can have art of its own, jade caches planted like green lightning, steely talking in pictures wherever words refuse to be born. Beyond the heartland, the Olmec stamp travels. Ridge towns to the west slap a word jaguar lip on their pots, and it doesn't look like imitation, it looks like comprehension. Villages in the highland stage courts that don't quite fit their slopes and fix the problem with a new etiquette of play. At some distant market, a child fingers a small green face and recognizes a kind of seriousness that doesn't need explaining. The horizon bends a little toward the gulf. Yet even at its height, the rise is not a single note. It is a chord, and one string hums the tune of water. In a year of prodigal rain, the drains earn their keep and the plazas stay a little smug. In a year of stingy sky, cisterns guarded in the shade keep a city honest. An old woman teaches a girl how to read cloud bottoms for distance and intent. A boy learns to smell the difference between lake and river and sea on the wind. These things go uncarved and unsigned, but without them there are no heads, no courts, no songs that last until dawn. By 1100 to 1000 BCE, San Lorenzo is a finished sentence spoken with the chest, and the air around it vibrates like the silence after a shell trumpet stops. Delegations arrive at the ridge and stand before thrones whose cave mouths gape like organized Genesis. Gifts are placed, hands are cut, mirrors flash, decisions land and stick. Over and over the city proves that order is a muscle and that it has learned how to flex without tearing itself. But while San Lorenzo perfects, another place imagines. Out on the island of firm ground, La Venta stacks clay into a slope so certain that even cloud takes it seriously. The first pyramid is not yet the mountain it will seem from the marsh, but already people come to stand at its base and feel their knees reconsider their pretensions. Mosaic pavements of serpentinite, faces laid flat, perfect and invisible once covered, teach a lesson that only the gods and archaeologists ever fully enjoy: some beauty is for the dark. Offerings are staged with an actor's hunger for meaning, rows of tiny jade figurines facing a single lord, a congress frozen and then buried because permanence requires privacy. Technologies proliferate at the edges of necessity. Textiles quiet and improve, tighter weaves that shed rain, more confident dyes that don't forget themselves in sunlight. Cordage learns new knots that do not slip when a stone dreams of returning to the river. Boats widen a hand's breadth, take an extra passenger, steal an hour from the storm. Medicine sort themselves, one leaf for fever, one bark for grief, one bitter seed that convinces the gut to hold what it should and release what it must. And always the game. As the city builds up, the ball still arcs in the evening like a sentence that never gets old. Hips bruise. Pride puffs and is corrected. On a night when the air is thin and the frogs have nothing left to say, a player makes the cleanest contact he has ever made. The ball kisses a marker and the plaza inhales as one. A lord laughs in relief he disguises as piety. An argument dies. A marriage happens. A journey is approved. The world, briefly, admits that it can be coherent. By 1000 to 900 BCE, the tide in the ridge begins to ebb, just barely, just enough for the drains to need more clearing than anyone wants to schedule, just enough for a caravan to try a different route and like it. San Lorenzo has not failed, it has completed its proof. La Venta's clay mountain, by contrast, is a new theorem that everyone wants to test. The horizon gains a tooth. Processions shift their loyalties the way tributaries do, not by treason but by gravity. And so the flowering is not only abundance, it is transition learned in public, without panic. The colossal heads at San Lorenzo keep watching. New heads at La Venta learn to. Between them, the web of trade, belief, and technique stays taut enough that a traveler moving by canoe and footstep can cross 100 miles and never feel truly lost. The rise stands complete enough to be admired, alive enough to keep inventing. The next breath of the story will smell of rank and ritual, of oaths and offerings, of sky serpents syllabled into law and baby jaguars rocked like arguments you hope will grow into justice. The camera must pass from tools to titles, from plazas to priests, from craft to the architecture of obedience. A city is a pact written in materials. At San Lorenzo, the pact is signed in clay and stone and water. In the cool before dawn, crews sweep plazas with palm brooms so deftly that even the dust seems grateful. By mid-morning, the kilns blush and breathe. By noon, canoemen shoulder bundles along levee paths polished by years of feet. By dusk, the drains murmur their steady sermon under the flagstones. Each element answers the others. Architecture rehearses hydrology, hydrology funds festivals, festivals justify monuments, monuments stabilize memory. Workshops hum with specialization that is still intimate enough to know names. The jade carver has a forefinger polished to glass. The shellworker flicks slivers thinner than breath and lays them edge to edge until a pendant rattles like rain. The mirror polisher keeps a pelt that drinks water perfectly. He squints into a square of magnetite until it begins to carry two suns, the one in the sky and the one in the brazier. The basalt pecker measures progress by blisters, reads grain with his palms, and knows that the line between command and cruelty along a carved lip can be the work of a single afternoon and a patient stone. Music threads the working day. Shell trumpets drag thunder into the plaza, turtle carapace drums keep the spine honest, seed rattles whisper the time between tasks, bone flutes edge the noon heat with a cool line of sound. The bull court next door takes those rhythms and makes them law. A match call to settle a dispute draws the town like gravity. The ball arcs, hip meets rubber, the crowd hisses or sighs, and fate agrees to be visible for a few heartbeats. When the ball kisses a marker clean, a merchant smiles or scowls and adjusts the price of obsidian accordingly. The court is ledgers and oaths and theatre at once. Trade becomes choreography. From the west and south, obsidian arrives in sheaves of prismatic blades that sing a thin, bright song when shaken. From the high valleys, jade and serpentine gleam like bottled rivers. From the coast, spondylus glows with orange heat even in shade, conch comes still muttering ocean syllables. In return go salt cakes, smoked fish, cotton, worked celts, mirrors, and the way the lowland style makes a mouth look both infant and jaguar at once. Canoes travel in pairs, then in processions, then in convoys shepherded by men who can read watercolor the way a priest reads clouds. Porters nod at one another on the trail, a greeting, a warning, a shared joke about the weight of favor. All this movement needs stations. Wayhouses appear, modest platforms with roofs that listen, jars of water kept in shade, hooks for nets, racks for drying sandals, a pile of rollers because someone is always moving stone. These places grow small markets of their own, where a traveler can trade a story for a mat for a good for a rumor. The web tightens until a jar stamped in San Lorenzo can be recognized by a woman 2 days upriver without reading a glyph. The angle of the handle is enough, the curve of the rim tells the rest. Urban planning ripens into ritualized geometry. Processional avenues slope so slightly that the body feels guided without noticing. Sightlines catch the solstice and the zenith, the sun threading a cord between two posts to remind the city that it has placed itself correctly on the earth. Platforms step like verses, short, long, long, short, composing a poem you walk. Underfoot, basalt conduits behave like promises kept, swallowing the tantrums of rain and returning plazas to usefulness before tempers can sour. The iconographic lexicon expands. The sky serpent bands become borders, then frames, then rhetoric. Place it around a face and you have declared that the speaker negotiates with weather. The word jaguar learns to be portable and intimate, a masquette to hang on the chest, a seal to kiss a ball of clay, a figurine to bury where the earth needs a reminder to be generous. Sprout glyphs hitch themselves to headbands, insisting that leadership should be read as provision. If anyone doubts, a priest burns copal, the smoke folds over the figures, and the plaza inhales slowly until doubt remembers its manners. And then the vantage shifts east. La Venta, island of certainty among argumentative waters, rises by accretion and will. A clay pyramid leans its long back into the sky, at its feet, serpentine mosaics lie flat and invisible, art for roots and ancestors. The offering complexes become rooms under the skin of the city, careful rows of tiny jade people facing a single lord, a congress arranged to be seen once and then only by the underworld. If San Lorenzo is a demonstration that the lowlands can master flow, La Venta argues that clay can be theology. By now, techniques have settled into repeatable miracles. Latex smokes and cures into balls that bounce with the memory of hands. Whitewash marries lime and light so walls glow at dusk. Cordage learns a new knot that refuses to slip even when the roller under a stone sledge has a bad idea. Medicinals separate themselves into stable wisdom, this leaf for fever, that bark for grief, that paste for the stingray spine's lesson. The more perfect the practice, the quieter the boasting. Artisans speak with their materials, not their mouths. By 1000 BCE, San Lorenzo's proofs have entered the canon. The heads listen to rain and news. The altars wait, their cave mouths untroubled by the fact that fewer feet pass daily. The drains still do their work, an ethics of flow that survives changing loyalties. Meanwhile, La Venta's slope gains the confidence of pilgrims who arrive and suddenly feel upright. The island's grammar is not subtle. It does not need to be. People leave carrying tokens, a shard of red, a pinch of white plaster, a story about the mosaic that nobody has seen but everyone can picture. The rise crests with an unexpected gentleness. There is no single day when San Lorenzo dies and La Venta is born screaming. There is a braiding of allegiance the way rivers braid at a delta, channels open, others narrow, a new current asks a canoe to try it, the canoe returns with praise. In the west, trade supports breathes as a lesser lung, inhaling trade, exhaling style. To the north and east, villages rehearse courts and altars in materials that are not ideal but are nearby, and the gods, pragmatic, accept the substitution. Standing at the close of 900 BCE, you can look back across the centuries and see the shape of accomplishment, architecture that negotiates with rain, craft that persuades stone to remember faces, trade that carries gossip and green across distances, rituals that keep quarrel from rotting the net. The tools have graduated to institutions. The tune has acquired lyrics. If the city is a body, hierarchy is its spine and belief the rhythm of its breath. The lowlands learn to stand by distributing weight, rulers to carry fate, priests to carry time, warriors and ballplayers to carry risk, artisans and traders to carry skill and distance, farmers and fishers to carry the earth's answer, porters and laborers to carry the stones themselves. Around them, children to inherit, elders to remember, captives to teach the price of losing. At the top sits the Lord, not always a tyrant, often a pivot, whose authority is a trimester of things, blood, ability, and sponsorship by gods. He wears a helmeted headband studded with jade, fastens a mirror to his chest so that everyone who addresses him must confront their own face haloed in flame. He is expected to be mountain and reed, to hold when storms shove, to bend when survival asks for flexibility. On state days he bleeds in public, tongue and ear, the red threaded into bark paper and sent up as incense, demonstrating that order is fed from the inside out. Beside him, or sometimes behind him, move the priesthood, men and women trained to count, to read the sky's grammar, to treat the calendar not as a clock but as a conversation with inevitability. They keep bundles of bones and masks and stones that are not merely objects but appointments the lineage keeps with the past. They know which days open easily and which fight, they remember which moon likes decisions and which eats them. Their tools are mirrors, smoke, cords knotted with days, stingray spines for opening skin, copal for opening the room. When they speak, even dogs stop moving. Warriors are less a standing army than a class of trained knees and eyes, hunters retasked to human weather. They know how to move through reed beds without telling the reeds they are there, how to run on a platform without making the clay remember, how to drop a net over a man and turn a duel into a harvesting. The ball players overlap them, hips bruised into maps of the court, lungs that can sing through pain, shows of grace that double as recruitment posters for courage. The artisan caste is a choir of hands. Their status flows with material. A jade worker's prestige is a thin gleam higher than a shell stringer's, a basalt sculptor eats nearer the dais than a paddle and anvil potter. But at festival time, all hands are equal, because nothing stands without each stroke. Apprenticeships are adoptions, a boy becomes the son of a stone, a girl the daughter of a clay. Mastery is declared with the simplest of tests, a ring on a rim, a luster on a mirror, a lip that commands obedience without cruelty. Traders and porters are the city's nerves and legs. They carry not just objects but calendars and phrases and colors and tastes. A caravan's return is public news. The market tilts around the bundles as if a new planet had wandered into the plaza. They follow patron deities of luck and direction, small fetishes hung from the neck, a twist of red thread around the wrist, a glyph scratched on the inside of a canoe where only the river will see it. They bring back stories as coin, and there are nights when a tale about a far pyramid buys as much favor as a string of jade. At the base but never beneath anyone's need are the farmers and fishers, the reed cutters and roofers, the ditch diggers and fill tampers, people who translate weather into bread and shelter. The city honors them with feasts, with ballgame seats when the harvest is good, with protection of boundaries when neighbors grow curious. In the wet months they carry water with the ingenuity of frustration, in the dry, they parcel shade like wealth. Their festivals are practical, dances that stomp seeds into mud, songs that count weeding days, offerings that combine taste and thank you in one good. Households knot into lineages that knot into wards. A ward owes labor to the city, days counted with a knotted cord, repaid in feasts and protection and the right to speak in the plaza. Leadership inside the ward moves along veins of competence. A grandmother with an exact memory of flood heights can quiet a room faster than a young man with a loud mirror. Marriage ties villages together, fosterage spreads loyalties the way trade spreads style. Captives complicate the picture, men who now carry water for a different god, women who marry into new lineages, children who grow up bilingual in the two flavors of authority. In this scaffold of roles, belief hangs like a woven skin that keeps the body warm and coherent. The cosmos is three-tiered, the world above where serpents carry lightning and birds gossip, the world below, a watery underworld of roots and old bones and agreements, and the middle, this place of plazas and drains and seed. The axis between them is a tree that grows through shrines and through skulls, or a mountain whose interior is a cave that is also a mouth that is also a throne, or a rope of smoke that priests pull until the gods remember their promises. The deities wear faces that are also roles. The Rain Lord has a jaw like a caiman and an eye that hates delay. When he is pleased, the sound of water on leaves is a choir. When he sulks, May's ears stay stingy. The Maize Child is both infant and ancestor, that downturned mouth the exact geometry of dependence. Everyone loves him and everyone sharpens stone to cut him. The Jaguar is night, power, and transformation, a king with his hair unbound and his pupils wide. Wind is a polite guest who can become family and then turn thief. Earth is a hungry table that must be fed with green axes and shell and blood. Ritual keeps these relationships domesticated. Bloodletting is a conversation, a thorn to the ear, a cord through the tongue, the red expressed into paper, the paper burned into smoke, the smoke taught the way to find the ear of a sky that has more petitioners than patience. Caches are letters buried in the underworld's post, jade celts laid north-south like sleeping fish, figurines frozen in council around a single lord, mosaics offered to darkness because not all beauty is for daylight. Pilgrimage is the city's exercise, La Venta's slope takes the knees, San Lorenzo's processional ways take the spine. Feasting is the Republic's redistribution disguised as joy, maize smoked and ground and steamed, cacao frothed until a bitter cloud sits in the good, fish grilled until oil drips like a small prophecy. There are transformers among the priests, call them shamans if your tongue needs a modern loan, who know how to tilt the self. They fast until vision thins the walls of the day. They chew bitter seeds and breathe tobacco until edges grow accommodating. They put on masks that are not costumes but agreements between bone and idea. When they come back from wherever the underworld is when it isn't beneath your feet, they carry instructions in images: carve this face, bury this green, align that axis, postpone this war. Not every instruction makes sense. Enough do. Death is citizenship in the underworld. Burials tuck loved ones into platform fill, under house floors, in small cemeteries that bloom with hummingbirds because someone planted flowers for the convenience of grief. Some skulls grow bound foreheads, a fashion that is also an ideal, teaching children that beauty is direction. Teeth, sometimes, carry stone inlays that flash when the mouth smiles and warn when it doesn't. The dead travel with beads or with nothing, but always with the certainty that feet will cross above their heads and that the earth will remember in layers. Governance is a choreography. The Lord speaks from a cave-mouth throne, half swallowed by origin and therefore allowed to speak about ends. The priest counters with calendar. The ward leaders argue quota and repair. The bull court settles what pride refuses to yield. When consensus emerges, the mirror is raised and turned slowly, the coin of fire walking across the faces of those who must carry the decision. Everyone nods. Everyone goes to work. Belief is not only pageant, it is policy. The calendar says when to plant and when to cut and when to align a procession with the angle of a shadow. The gods assign risk: this family feeds the fire tonight, that lineage opens skin tomorrow. The market obeys taboos that keep fish from rotting and tempers from fouling. The court obeys omens that save the city from jewels it cannot afford. In drought, green descends into the ground like rain held in stone. In flood, offerings persuade the water to remember that it is a guest, not a homeowner. At last, hierarchy and belief not so snugly that you can pluck one and hear the other resonate. A lord's accession is a storm is a lord's accession. A ball game is a trial is a cosmic rehearsal. A cache is a treaty is a cache. The city becomes a grammar. People speak it with their feet, their hands, their smoke, their blood. War in the lowlands learned to breathe water. In a country of channels and reed beds, the first tactic is not the charge but the silence that precedes it. Canoes ride low, hulls rubbed with mud to dull the shine, paddles dipping without a splash. Men crouch with atlatls laid across their knees like folded wings, obsidian-tipped darts sleeping in bundles that smell of green wood and smoke. On shore, causeway stitched from clay and basketwork run like thin ribs through the marsh, guard posts perch where mangrove gives way to firm ground, their roofs listening to the wind for news. You win here not by speed alone but by knowing where the river forgot its depth. Politics draws the first lines. San Lorenzo, at its height, governs not with garrisons but with gravity, gifts, oaths, and the heavy logic of drains and courts. A lord from the ridge sends mirrors and green celts to a village 2 days downriver. The village answers with salt cakes, fish, and a promise to close its market to rivals on feast days. But promises fray. A shipment of obsidian goes missing on a backwater. A messenger returns late, his shoulder gouged by a stingray spine that was meant for another man's blood. The council weighs insult against patience. Drums speak in low code from ward to ward. Canoes are counted. Nets are patched. War is declared with preparations that look like repairs. Fighting in reed and mud is an arithmetic of angles. The first blow is usually distance, a rain of darts thrown from canoes or from the shelter of palm shield walls, the obsidian edges biting with a whisper and then with revelation. The second blow is entanglement, a net flicked across a bow, a cord tossed to snag a paddle or a wrist, a sudden heave that turns balance into surrender. Only at the last do clubs, axes, and stone-edged blades speak the blunt grammar of closeness. Shields are woven cane-faced with hide, helmets, padded bark stitched tight, armor, where there is armor, is cotton quilted and stiffened with salt, the lowlands answer to bronze. The bull court steadies politics until it doesn't. Often a feud between wards or neighbors ends with a match, hip to marker, clean, before the eyes of gods and judges, and the loser pays in tribute, not blood. But sometimes the losing team refuses the verdict. A lord's face stays set while his jaw clenches. The next morning, patrols lengthen. A month later, a procession is watched with unusual stillness. In a season, altars near the boundary begin to sprout new offerings, the kind meant to persuade gods to tolerate marching feet. Not all wars travel far. Some are surgical, short, punitive visits across a line that was not supposed to move. A fleet of canoes slips out at moonset. By dawn, a rival storehouse is smoking, his landing choked with cut reeds, his court markers toppled and defaced with a crossband that tells anyone who can read styles exactly who came. No bodies are left if it can be helped. The message is capacity and restraint. We could take more, but we will take only what debt requires. The enemy's reply, if he is competent, is feast and apology within the month, and hostages sent to learn the victorious city's manner of speaking. Other wars are protracted, slow as drought. They begin in caravans rerouted and brides withheld, in rumor that certain highlanders now prefer another lowland altar. They unfold in market prices and calendar slights, in a festival's date moved so that pilgrims must choose one pyramid slope or the others. By the time spearmen line a causeway, the conflict is already old. Victory is won less by a single blow than by the wear of advantage, the better drains, the more dependable storehouses, the lord whose mirror throws steadier fire in council. Captives are the currency everyone understands. They are displayed in processions, wrists bound with red cord, faces painted with lime so the crowd can see whose oath broke. Some are kept, married into lineages, set to work under roofs that do not echo their mother tongues. Some are sacrificed at thresholds where the city restates its agreements with earth and water. The public blade is not only theology, it is politics in a grammar that even the illiterate can read. Here is how promises end when they end badly. Trophies are discreet, a labret, an earspull, a pattern from a defeated lord's headband stitched quietly into a victor's. Inside the city, politics is the art of keeping powerful rooms from overheating. The lord sits half swallowed by a cave-mouth throne, the priest at his right lifting knotted cords of days, ward leaders in a crescent like a row of stone set to deflect a current. Arguments are ritualized, each man speaks while the mirror's coin of light travels his face, each woman who keeps the household tallies for her ward whispers to her cousin and the whisper moves. When voices rise, the drums at the door offer a beat that changes the rate of breath. If that fails, the council recesses to the bull court or to the shrine where smoke can take the top off a boiling room. The San Lorenzo to La Venta transition is the peninsula's great seminar in political replacement without collapse. At first, no one says the word decline. They say silt. They say new routes. They say La Venta's clay mountain makes knees remember their purpose. Meanwhile, on the ridge, monuments are recut, heads are moved or half buried, altars reinscribed to suit a smaller audience. It is not vandalism so much as revision, a city editing itself to live within altered margins. La Venta learns to host pilgrims and to dress hegemony in generosity, feasts that end with policy, gifts that carry strings stronger than cordage. Along the frontier, where lowland water meets foothill stone, politics is a braid of trade and threat. Emissaries climb to towns that grow obsidian like night flowers. They bring cacao, salt, shell, mirrors, and the promise that their style of authority is the shortest road between ambition and memory. Some hill lords accept, their courts sprout jaguar lips on their pots, their players learn a lowland etiquette of hip and heel. Others smile and accept the gifts and commit to nothing. These, sometimes, find their processions interrupted by uninvited drums. Raids along the coast have their own theatre. Men move at tide turn, when mangrove roots loosen their grip on water and channels open like brief permissions. Targets are salt pans, drying racks, canoe yards, the sinews of a shoreline's strength. The defenders answer with fire carried in clay pots, with sand underfoot to break a charge, with ropes pulled across narrow channels that flip a canoe like a beetle. Victory smells of brine and smoke, defeat of wet ash and oath. Some names, in later centuries, will be attached to battles the way vines claim an old stump. Here we will not pretend to hear those names in the original mouths. But the pattern is legible, a sudden strike at dawn, a retaliatory raid 2 moons later, a council where mirrors and knotted days argue for patience and a ballgame tries to save blood and sometimes fails. A year of feasts to patch tears, then a year of weapon-making under tarps that smell of rain. The heads watch and do not comment. Within the city, politics is also distribution. Tribute arrives as corn, fish, cloth, stone, hands. The Lord Stewards keep ledgers in memory and piles, the calendar schedules labor so that a drain is never without a crew, a kill without fuel, a court without chalk. Favor circulates. The ward that sent the best porters to the Tuxtlas receives the first seats at the next festival. The lineage that kept the causeway intact through floods wins the right to host the pilgrims' market. Envy is managed by ritual, oaths renewed under mirrors, blood priced and paid where necessary, marriages arranged like treaties with upholstery. When politics fails, exile is more common than extinction. A defeated house relocates 2 bends downriver, takes its gods in bundles, and starts again with platforms and drains that look suspiciously familiar. In a generation, the quarrel is remembered mostly by grandmothers, and the new settlement trades with the old under a truce of mutual usefulness. The lowlands, jealous of human names but generous with human needs, prefer reconfiguration to ruin. Weapons improve in increments. The atlatl learns a bone hook that holds the dart tighter, the dart foreshaft shortened so that the obsidian point can be replaced as easily as anger. Clubs gain a ridge that catches and breaks, axes learn a double bevel that splits cane as decisively as skull. Helmets wear glyph bands that make a man taller in the mind of the one who fears him. None of this is an arms race as later empires will know it. It is craft applied to risk. Even victory must be administered. After a successful campaign, the city performs the two feasts, one for the living, where cacao shivers in froth and the ball is thrown high to release the crowd from weeks of clenched breath, and one for the dead, where words are said that cannot be translated and green goes back into the ground to pay for the loan of strength. The captain of the raid eats second, not first, because hierarchy is fortified by discipline in the moment when triumph would rather be appetite. The last centuries of the Olmec span bring new neighbors with different grammars of power. Some build on ridges that declare a stone logic, others on coastal flats that boast canoes with longer memories. Diplomats learn other syllables for oath, trade, truce. Politics thickens. War narrows, shorter strokes, sharper aims, more often preempted by the ball court or by a marriage staged under a serpent band that everyone agrees means peace for now. And so the art of power, the threat and gift, the drum and mirror, the dart and net, settles into custom. The lowlands remain what they have always been, a place where water must be courted and where the most successful lord is the one who can make flow obey without pretending it can be owned. From the clangor and choreography of war and rule, the tale widens to reach what survives of these ways when capitals shift and mounds green over, how styles spread beyond the marsh, how heads and axes, games, and mirrors echo in centuries that do not know the names of their makers. Centuries pass, the mounds turn green and the plazas go to seed, and still the lowlands refuse to forget. In places where the drains remain whole, rains keep their old appointment and vanish under stone with the same obedient hiss. In villages that never saw a pyramid, children chalk courts on hard dirt and send a black moon of rubber humming through twilight. In houses far from any quarry, a small green axe sleeps under a post because someone's grandmother once learned that wealth, when buried, becomes weather. What began between 1500 and 400 BCE as engineering stitched to myth survives as habits stitched to identity. The faces endure first. On coasts that know only salt and news, a fisherman ties a thread of river-colored jade around his neck and the sea treats him a little kinder. In ridge towns that never learn to like mud, a pot shows the word jaguar lip, infant mouth downturned, the faint rumor of fangs, and the guests at a feast nod as if recognizing a relative. In markets where maize stands high and the gods stand higher, a mirror is lifted and the coin of fire walks across brows, men and women straighten unconsciously, remembering a lord half swallowed by a cave mouth throne hewn in another age. The iconography travels faster than armies and lasts longer than treaties. It is a language with no single capital and too many native speakers to die. The bull game carries the law forward. The rules bend to new geographies, but the grammar does not, hip to marker, clean, public breath held as if the world hinged on a rebound, verdict pronounced in a trajectory rather than in a sentence. Courts are scribed into the earth north and west, east and south, until evening in Mesoamerica means, almost everywhere, a rubber moon and a quorum of neighbors. The hip yoke, the belt of stuffed bark, the headdresses that grow tall in ceremony and humble on the court, these drift, morph, settle, and still point back toward the swamp that made order out of water. The calendar, too, finds legs. What began as counted steps between posts, as knotted cords and zenith shadows that made children dizzy, resolves into a cycle that reads the year like a drum reads a dancer. The lowlands' addiction to alignment, the way plazas obey sunrise, the way causeways conspire with solstice, becomes a discipline elsewhere. Days are named, numbers acquire private flavors, account of sacred days threads through marriages, markets, raids, and repairs. Priests in far cities learn to time their smoke so that the gods are listening when the petition arrives. 1,000 miles from the Tuxtlas, a boy ties a cord between two stakes and plucks it for the old reason, to hear whether days are still tuned. Water work is the quiet bequest. Where later capitals arise on ridges and mesas, they still borrow lowland logic, slope the court so slightly the eye doesn't notice but the puddle does, hide the drain's mouth in ornament, bed the sumps like ambushes for rain. Clay reimagines itself as pyramid again and again, in places that do not need it to stand but need it to mean. The platform as promise, the plaza as sentence, the axis that folds sky and cave and thrown into one readable figure, these are drawings the region chooses to trace over, as if the original stylus left a groove no one can ignore. Trade routes remember their first braids and keep them. The green lightning of jade still strikes along old corridors, the black glass of obsidian still flies from volcano to court, shell and salt still move where oaths can be measured by taste. Merchants inherit a gait that carries bargains as well as goods, and their boats inherit a habit of hugging mangrove shade as if heat and politics were equally shy of direct light. Way stations become towns, towns become cities, cities look in their mirrors and see the angle of ears pools, the cut of labrets, the vocabulary of glyph bands that say, without recourse to alphabet, we participate in a larger order. On the Gulf's western shoulder, where Tres Zapotes had once breathed as a lesser lung, memory hardens into experiment. Stones carry faces and numbers at once, the habit of counting turns from knotted cords and shadow marks into carved intentions. Even if the old capitals have softened, the idea that time can be written keeps stalking the lowlands until it finds a way to etch its stalk. Scripts elsewhere will grow tall with their own leaves, but the first rustle, the hunch that days can be made visible, belongs to the country where drains hum and mirrors throw suns. Recarving becomes a doctrine of survival. When dynasties end, heads are moved, altars reinscribed, thrones tilted and set back with new names in old stone. The practice is not desecration, it is continuity by edit. A city that has acquired the muscle memory to lift basalt decides that meaning is too precious to quarry from scratch every time the wind shifts. The result is a landscape of palimpsests, faces that remember more than one brow, mouths that have pronounced more than one oath, platforms that have stood under more than one sky serpent band. Later peoples inherit not just shapes but the permission to repurpose shapes, the courage to argue with the past using the past's own materials. In the hinterlands, the Olmec stamp turns into vernacular. Potters who never stood within sight of La Venta's slope set their fingers to a rim and find, by instinct or rumor, the curve that makes a vessel feel inevitable. Farmers bury beads at field edges for reasons that a priest could explain but never improves by explanation. A small musket appears in a roadside shrine, a hunter touches its downturned mouth before loading his atlatl, not because he believes the clay hears him, but because his grandmother's harvest once came good after a similar gesture. Faith persists where memory weakens, form persists where faith is shy. Either way, the gesture survives. The idea of rulership, half shaman, half engineer, walks on. Later lords on far ridges sit within rather than upon their power, staging themselves inside portals that declare origin and therefore authority. Public blood continues to knit orders, mirrors continue to discipline speech. The bull court remains available when pride needs geometry to become teachable. And the feast, the lowland's most effective piece of policy disguised as happiness, keeps redistributing grain and gratitude wherever a city hopes its wards will endure their quotas with grace. Even the silences the lowlands invented keep working. The practice of burying perfect art, serpentine mosaics laid face down in darkness, rows of figurines arranged in council and sealed away, teaches other polities a counterintuitive lesson: not all beauty is for humans, not all value is for eyes. To make the underworld a patron, you must gift it something that tastes like sacrifice. So offerings sink under new plazas, caches multiply, earth becomes archive. Later centuries will unearth these grammar notes and misread some and weep at others, but the impulse, to write to darkness, is itself the heritage. When the old capitals loosen their grip, when 400 BCE arrives with its familiar arguments of silt and root, of neighbors who have learned to be compelling in their own ways, there is no apocalypse, no abandoning of gods to rot in the wet. There is a redistribution of confidence. Artisans walk away with their hands intact and set up shops where new lords can afford mirrors. Bull players teach other cities why hips matter. Priests carry bundles of bones and days and plug them into new calendars without losing their favorite omens. Porters reroute, markets reorient, feasts test and then adopt new recipes. The lowland's genius, that flow can be made to obey without being owned, turns out to be a political philosophy as much as an engineering trick. And the land, always speaking, keeps repeating the thesis. When a flood forgets itself, it remembers again inside a basalt throat carved centuries before. When a drought imagines permanence, cisterns under platforms argue against it in cool, persuasive darkness. When a city fails to guard its causeways, the reeds reclaim them in 3 seasons and everyone nearby remembers why maintenance is a kind of prayer. The next builders read these reminders with their feet and build accordingly. Stand, finally, where the Gulf fog breathes into the mangroves and the Tuxtlas hold their dark shoulders under a white sky. Imagine a corridor of centuries through which faces of stone have watched, unblinking, while children learn to grind maize and men learn to be persuaded by slope. Hear a shell trumpet somewhere you cannot see, the sound pulled like a storm through a narrow throat. See a rubber ball hang for a heartbeat at the top of its arc. Feel, under your soles, the faint, thrumming confidence of drains that still work. This is what remains when names erode, methods. A way of placing weight, a way of telling time, a way of making water agree, a way of asking the sky without humiliating the earth. Call it Olmec if you like, though they did not. Call it lowland mastery, green lightning, the grammar of damp. It is the reason the region keeps producing cities that talk to the gods in materials and angles and sound. It is why a mirror, lifted anywhere between the Pacific smoke and the Gulf salt, still throws a sun onto a human face and makes that face behave. And so the epic closes where it began, on shores that sweat and hills that brood, in a country that trains patience to split stone and imagination to stack clay. The heads do not blink, the plazas still make sentences out of steps, the ball still proves that justice can be felt. The fog rolls in, then lifts. The drums count us out. The calendar nods once. The story's last word is not an ending but a method handed forward. Make. Mean. Move. The echo of the lowlands is not a single sound, it is a climate of listening. Far upriver, where the air dries and stone grows more confident, masons teach stairs to behave like processions and roofs to collect stars in bowls of lime. They have never walked the mangrove tunnels, never lifted a roller out of sucking mud, yet their plazas keep a slope you can feel in your calves but hardly see. Someone, somewhere, heard about drains that swallow rage and return usefulness, and the rumor hardened into method. In hill cities that wear distance like jewelry, the mirror ceremony persists. The steward turns a polished magnetite sun across the faces of petitioners. As the light moves, speech becomes measurable, and the room remembers sequence. Children in those places grow up believing that order has a temperature, the warmth felt when a circle of fire touches skin and lets you speak. They inherit, without knowing the source, a lowland conviction that behavior can be engineered with light, rhythm, and slope. The word jaguar, that ambiguous infant with thunder in its mouth, keeps appearing where arguments about power and mercy are tightest. Sometimes the lips thin into cruelty, sometimes thicken into generosity, sometimes the cleft head closes, sometimes opens like a sprout. Every variation is a negotiation with what a ruler is for. A pendant on a mountain, a mural on a coast, a clay toy in a valley, each one is a ballot cast in a centuries-long election whose only candidate is authority and whose only platform is rain and bread. Green lightning, the trade of jade, seeds ambitions wherever it strikes. In drought years, lords wear it tight, as if stone rain could persuade cloud to remember its jobs. In fat years, beads lengthen into sentences across chests, the way the lowlands taught, a line that says provision is a technology, not an accident. Merchants learn to hear green, a note when beads clack in the hand, a higher note when a polished face kisses a mirror's edge. The best traders can tell a valley by the sound of its jade. The bull travels faster than doctrine. A game needs only 2 walls, or even the memory of walls, and an agreement that hip, not hand, is the road to verdict. In a market town's dusk, the court may be nothing more than a rectangle kicked into dust, markers guessed by consensus, the rubber a patched veteran of many evenings, yet when a clean strike finds the chalked line, the crowd leans into silence exactly as they do beneath great pyramids. Philosophy without proclamation, motion as judge. Scholars in later cities will argue over glyphs, over the first places where days were carved and names tied to numbers. But the habit that makes those arguments possible, the belief that time has handles, belongs to the country that measured solstice with pebbles and zenith with dizziness. When a scribe scratches a count into stone, when a priest times a procession to catch the sun in a corridor of shadow, they are spending a currency minted in mud and mangrove. The piety of concealment, that lowland art of making beauty for darkness, spreads like a shy genius. Elsewhere, too, men lay mosaics face down, arrange figurine councils for soil alone, slip axes into the ground so the underworld eats green and returns rain. Even cultures that prefer their gods loud and visible steal this one quiet trick: give what you cannot afford to lose, where nobody can applaud you for it. The return on such offerings is never immediate and always communal. When capitals shift, their grammar survives as accent. A new lord on a ridge fits his face into a portal cut like a throat, and speaks with an imported cadence, half cave, half cornfield. He may bathe in mountain air and prefer hard horizons, but his accession still borrows the lowland format: blood into paper, smoke into sky, mirror across brows. In his courts, the bull still holds a veto; in his markets, salt cakes still behave like little suns that can be counted and traded for weather. From the lowland's western periphery, experiment grows into script and stela, into the habit of naming events with dates that do not wash away. A stone there carries both face and number, as if memory refused to separate portrait from when. The idea that history is a tool, that it can be measured, carved, carried forward, is another lowland export, as essential and invisible as knowing that plazas must drain. Diaspora artisans leave with skills that don't need passports. A jade worker sets up near a highland pass and, within a season, local gods acquire green mouths that speak more clearly. A mirror polisher finds a city hungry for two sons in every council. A drain layer invents themselves into a court architect in a land that thought rain was a spectator, not a participant. Everywhere they go, the same principle holds: flow obeys attention. Even revolt inherits lowland manners. A faction that breaks from a lord does not smash the heads, it turns them, or moves them, or reinscribes their helmets, edit rather than erase. A new house claims old stone and days the gods to notice the difference. The gods, who have learned to love maintenance, rarely object. The ethics embedded in games, drains, and feasts outlast flags. Justice remains something you can feel, a ball's trajectory tightening the ribs until even the loser nods. Stewardship remains the art of slope and timing, a city proudest when rain forgets to be trouble. Redistribution remains food and music rather than theory: cacao froth, fish oil, maize steam, and a dancer's heel thudding a beat that tells the wards they still belong. When strangers arrive from outside the lowland web, as strangers always do, bearing gods with different eyebrows and rulers with stone that refuses to smile, the country answers with its method. It offers flow as contract: trade our seas of green for your mountains night, let our court settle pride, let our drains teach your plazas how to breathe. Some strangers learn the grammar and become less strange. Others refuse and find that water is a patient gorilla. What remains at the widest remove, in centuries that have forgotten names but not techniques, is a way of thinking with materials. If you stack clay steep and sweep it daily, it becomes a horizon. If you cut stone until it remembers a face, that face can organize a city's breath. If you take blood out where eyes can see it, order becomes a shared substance. If you teach rubber to carry verdicts, law can be enacted by the body. If you bury green where fingers cannot retrieve it, the underworld becomes a partner. And the land keeps whispering its single admonition: do not forget the drains. Every drought is a lie about the future, every flood a lie about the present. The truth is maintenance, unheroic, faithful, endlessly reparable. Civilizations that remember this are not immortal. They simply fail usefully, leaving methods that can be picked up like tools by hands that never knew the first heads or the names of the first lords.